You're watching Behind the Headlines. I'm Pacchia. Ever since the beginning of the financial crisis, the national conversation has often centered on the idea that the large banks in this country are so big that the federal government would be compelled to bail them out whenever they appear to be in the danger of failing. Nearly everyone agrees that this would be a dangerous position for our society, but opinions differ dramatically as to whether the too big to fail problem remains an actual extant threat to our economy. Joining me now is the one and only Rodge Cohen, partner at Sullivan Cromwell. Welcome back. Thanks so much for coming to see us.
My pleasure.
There appears to be two camps on this issue today. One says Dodd-Frank fixes too big to fail, and the other says no, it doesn't quite. Where do you come down on the issue, Rodge?
I come down very much on the side that Dodd-Frank did an excellent job in fixing too big to fail. Let's talk about the two pieces of too big to fail. One, would there be a rescue of a large bank that failed or a large financial institution? The answer is clearly there could not be. Dodd-Frank's mandates are very specific and very clear. Shareholders are wiped out, management is replaced, debt holders suffer any losses, and taxpayers are fully protected. In addition, the rescue mechanisms, which were used by the Federal Reserve in 2008, have been basically emasculated. Now, the second aspect of too big to fail is whether the resolution regime actually works. And I think if you look at it fair-mindedly, you will conclude that there is an effective resolution regime for large financial institutions, which is now in place largely through the bridge company mechanism.
But of course, this is Congress, and this is the United States government, and Congress can, in times of economic crisis, do what it needs to do to protect the national interest. Is there anything specific in Dodd-Frank that prevents Congress from taking that specific course of action?
Well, no Congress can constitutionally bind another Congress. What Dodd-Frank does is to minimize, in fact reduce to close to zero, the risk that that will need to be done. The way that Title II works, there is an effective regime to take down a large institution without systemic consequences.
This is becoming a bit of an emotional issue in the national media. I think at some point people are beginning to view the too big to fail debate as a bit of a proxy for all criticisms of DC's relationship with big banks and the financial industry. It's almost as if too big to jail and too big to manage get rolled up into this conversation, and it's all one and the same. If Dodd-Frank does resolve too big to fail, what about too big to jail? I mean, we had the Attorney General of the United States telling Congress a couple months back that some banks are too large and too influential to be properly prosecuted. What can resolve that situation? That's a unique moment in American history.
Well, let me back up one moment to your predicate, which is all these too bigs to something. I think it reduces to a common denominator, which is just too big. And there's a whole political issue there as to whether we should have large financial institutions, period. But with respect to too big to jail, frankly, I was surprised at the Attorney General's comment, because for a very long time there has been written in by the Department of Justice some very thoughtful considerations of when you should prosecute a corporation, bank or non-bank. And the reason for hesitating to prosecute a corporation is not because of its size. It is because of the consequences for many innocent actors. And those are the employees, the stockholders, people who had nothing to do at all with the incident. Moreover, a corporation is really not an independent actor in this case. You have individuals who act. So unless the malfeasance is pervasive and at the highest levels of senior management, it seems that prosecuting a corporation of any size is very dubious.
So going back to the size issue, where do you come down on that political question? Is there a point where the size of a bank becomes so great that it puts the national interest in danger?
Absolutely, there could be such a situation. And in several European countries, you have banks which are too big to save because they just outweigh the entire GDP. But the major banks in the United States are far below the percentage of GDP, which they are in virtually every other country.
Right. Unless you take exposure to derivatives into account, of course.
Well, and how do you calculate exposure to derivatives? But if you look at the net exposure, it would still be way below what it is in any other country in the world.
As you know, there's a really interesting proposal in Congress from Senators Vitter and Brown to address too big to fail. In part, it would increase capital levels for big banks. What do you make of the idea?
Well, there are actually several provisions in the Brown-Vitter proposal. Almost all of the focus has been on capital, although there are other provisions which are quite significant as well, but just focusing on capital. The 15% leverage ratio on an apples-to-apples basis really amounts to about 18 to 20% if you compare it to the current leverage requirements, which means that it is 3 or 4 times what the current leverage requirements are. Now, I would be the first to say that at 3, 4, 5% leverage requirements are too low. At the equivalent of 18 to 20%, I find it very difficult to believe that banks could obtain returns on equity which would make them really viable competitors. And it's a pretty simple mathematical exercise. If you raise the equity 2 times, return on equity will be reduced by 50%.
Are you in favor of this bill?
No.
Why is that?
Several reasons. Again, it is appropriate to look at leverage. It is appropriate to have higher leverage requirements. But these provisions, the 15, possibly 18 to 20, are just too high for any bank to make a meaningful return on equity. Also, I think that Senators Brown and Vitter would be the first to acknowledge, and it's really inherent in your question, that these provisions, these capital provisions, have very little to do with true safety and soundness at these levels, but are more geared to the political view that we should punish big banks for being big. It's an effort to force them to reduce in size. And I'm not in favor of Congress legislating beyond our antitrust laws any limit on size. Why break up the big banks or impose regulations? If you're going to do that, what about the largest big oil companies, the largest pharma companies, the largest tech companies? Congress should regulate on size to protect competition. Beyond that, it's a political issue which is best left to the marketplace.
Yeah, it does beg the question, why are banks different? And that's certainly a debate we've seen play out over the last couple of years. Rodge, thank you so much for stopping by today.
Great to be here.
This was really interesting. That's Rodge Cohen, a partner at the law firm Sullivan Cromwell. If you'd like to learn more about the cases and issues we just discussed, be sure to go check out our offerings on BloombergLaw.com and also on the Bloomberg Terminal. You can see more of our videos on YouTube, and of course you can follow our updates on Twitter. I'm Pacchia. Thanks for watching.